Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with a video to discuss the upcoming new units as well as the new Regiments of Renown, the new lords and new heroes, and how they might change the meta and how they might sort of, what impact they might have in both multiplayer and I guess to an extent in campaign. It'll probably a bit less so there because campaign is just fairly straightforward and easy if I'm to be blunt. But yeah, we did get a nice showcase of most of the units, even the units we didn't get to see played, like the Salamander hunting pack. We did get the statistics for them, which is really nice. It was put up in a nice little Reddit spreadsheet, sort of spreadsheet format here with all the unit cards. Now there are a few missing here. Lord Croak is one of them. There's also a few ability changes missing, so I will try to mention them as we go through. But I mostly just wanted to discuss what we can glean from these statistics and the numbers here, and how this might shake up the meta, how this might shake up the game, what impact this might have on existing matchups. And we're kind of going to hit this in two parts. The first part, I want to discuss the new units in general, and then we're going to discuss the Regiments of Renown and how that might toss things up, because there is a bit of a Regiments of Renown, obviously they're one-off, and I think their impact is a little bit different, and obviously not necessarily all of them are new or based on new units. So I just kind of want to cover the new stuff first, or the full new units first, and then go on to other things. So regardless, well, first and foremost, we've got Tehenawin, who is here in 3 different formats. We actually didn't get his numbers on a horned one. He's got 3 mount options. Foot obviously is also an option, but he's got a Riperdactyl as well as a ancient Stegodon mount. So definitely some cool stuff. Now Tehenawin, he's got his lore of beasts. He's a lore of beast caster. He's also got very respectable melee stats, which is pretty cool. He's got AP damage, 55 melee attack, 45 melee defense, poison damage. So he's actually pretty comparable to Morgr in some ways, in that sense, or Skrulk in the sense that he's a decent melee combatant who's got some cool support abilities bound to him. His armor's okay. 75 is nothing to brag about, but it's not terrible either. And obviously with his lore of beasts in there, he's definitely going to be a pretty solid caster now. I'm not sure about his cost exactly. He does actually have Frenzy as well, which is worth noting. But I'm not entirely sure about what his costs are going to be. But for sure, his raw stat line is very, very potent. And Beast isn't a bad lore. It's not necessarily the most powerful lores, but especially if you go with a cheaper lineup as the Beastmen, where you're not necessarily too concerned about supporting units with Apotheosis from, say, Mazdamundi, or if you're not too concerned about getting the raw stopping power of Croak. In that situation, Tehenawin is definitely going to be pretty solid, and his monstrous mounts kind of help with that. You can put him up on a Riperdactyl, which bumps his stats up even further. It gives him a much greater damage output. It gives him obviously, and then he can fly, and gives him better charge bonus, all that sort of stuff. Though not too much more HP, so definitely worth keeping in mind. And if you put him on a Stegodon, Stegodon, now obviously here the stats we have are from Ultra settings, so do keep in mind some of these stats are from Ultra size, but his HP will be much greater. He's going to have much better armor. And he actually retains poison. The poison that he gets on foot, he actually retains it on both the Stegodon mount as well as the flying mounts. So that's going to be a big buff, and it's definitely going to help him a lot, I think. Just at being able to survive, and being able to sustain through bad situations. Next up, we do have the Ancient Salamander. Well, now this unit did get a little bit of a showcase in the Everchosen. Not necessarily used to the best effect in every situation, but it's an interesting unit. It's very squishy by Legionman standards. So 95 armor, only 4,500 HP, definitely on the lower end of things. But it does have the benefit of fear as well as terror. It's got very good speed of 75. Melee stats not the most amazing thing ever, but its ranged attacks are very, very potent, and they actually imbue fire weakness onto your opponents. Much like the power of the Dragonback, for example, for the dwarves. Make your opponents more vulnerable. And this actually synergizes well with a lot of Legionman units. Legionmen have a surprisingly decent lineup of fire damage. You've got obviously the new Salamander hunting packs, but also you've got your Pterodon Riders with Fire Leech Bolas. You've got your Bastildons with solar engines and units like that. And these units will definitely synergize very well. And who knows, maybe at some point Slann Mage Priest should have more lures of magic. So maybe at some point we'll get a Slann Mage Priest with a lure of fire. And in that case, the synergy would be even more insane. That said, the Ancient Salamander obviously rampages. It's got Primal Instincts, which actually has changed, and I should mention that here at the beginning. Primal Instincts was changed. It now triggers at 20% HP rather than 50%, so huge buff. And then when it does trigger, it actually boosts your charge bonus by 16%, and it boosts melee attack by 8. So it's actually a huge buff now from what it used to be. And I think it's going to make the Lizardmen far more, it's really going to help them a lot, and I think it's going to make them far more competitive. Now, I'm not entirely sure if the pure Rampage was changed in any way. I don't think it was, actually, but definitely for these Primal Instinct units, it's going to be a big, big change. Next up, we do have the Red Crested Skanks. These guys are your new light AP infantry. I think the closest comparison to be drawn here is Nasty Skulkers, but compared to normal Skanks, they've got much more HP per model because there's only 90 of them rather than 120, and they've got 6,000 HP. Very low armor, very bad melee defense at 19. Weapon strength actually isn't that good. Now, 20 of it is AP, but keep in mind that SARS, for example, I do believe at 18 armor-piercing damage. So, well, 20 AP is a good as far as ratio of the damage output goes, and these guys are obviously probably going to be much cheaper, and they're much more mobile, and they've got their own niche. It is worth keeping in mind that the 20 AP by the standards of Lizardmen is not necessarily that high. That said, I could see this unit being very valuable as a support tool, and especially the dwarf matchup, but as well also in other more heavily armored situations, because the unit can flank. It's got good mobility, so you can really get into backlines. If this unit gets on something like Thunderers or Quarrelers or whatever unit, heavily armored unit like that, honestly, if it gets into the back, if you manage to flank, say, some dwarf troops or get on top of miners or whatever, these guys will level them very quickly. Whereas normal Skanks will do very little, or they'll get routed off, like get beaten down. It's actually pretty pathetic. So I think this is going to be a huge improvement in certain matchups for the Lizardmen, but I don't think this unit's really crazy powerful. It doesn't have, say, the utility of Nasty Skulkers. You don't have the smoke bombs. You do have some nice leadership. You've got Frenzy. You've got good damage output for what's most likely a fairly cheap unit. I can't see these guys being more than like 500 gold a piece, which is obviously much cheaper than Saurus and a fairly budget unit. But definitely, I wouldn't expect these guys to all be like an overpowered, crazy piece of work. I just think they're going to be a big boon, and especially the dwarf matchup. Next up, and like I said, I will cover the Regiments of Renown after we've covered the new units. Next up, we do have the Salamander Hunting Pack. This unit was not displayed at the Everchosen. I'm not entirely sure what its attacks look like. I'm not sure if it's got like a flamethrower type attack, which would make sense with the anti-large, or if it's like a bolt of fire or something. Regardless, the unit does have AP and anti-large. Now, it's basically like a very cheap budget version of the Ancient Salamander and just the raw stats for most of everything. You've got obviously fairly low melee stats, so the Salamander has pretty low melee stats as well, the Ancient Salamander. The armor is pretty good at 90. The mobility is very good at 70, but your leadership is very low, 55. The Ancient Salamander actually doesn't have great leadership either. It's only at 65, and that's with I do believe this is actually an in-game shot, so it's with secured flanks, so I think it's probably like 60 at baseline. So leadership really is not very good on this unit. It does cause fear. I think that against light cavalry units like that, it's going to be decent in defending itself, but definitely don't expect it to be winning any melee duels. That said, the range damage is interesting. Now, the anti-large is not something I would have really expected from this unit, but it actually might be pretty powerful. Being able to deal with something like, say, Kolek, or honestly any big tanky monster without having to risk your big monsters of your own, without having to throw Carnosaurs into like a pocket of Chosen with halberds or something, is going to be a big buff, in my opinion. It could potentially be a very powerful unit in that sense. That said, short range is definitely going to be an issue. You're going to be out-skirmished by basically everything because you're so squishy and you've got no range. Obviously, the armor will help you survive against lower-end arrows and archery, but most people will be bringing AP shooting against you as lizards, and it's definitely going to be tough to hold up against that. Next up, the Ripperdactyls. This unit looks honestly awesome, in my opinion, but definitely has a lot of... It's a very glass cannon unit. You can see it clearly here, 4,200 HP, not high, very high. Armor's only 45, 22 melee defense, 8 models. They're squishy. They're like the definition of glass cannons. Their melee attack is really where it's, and offense stats are where it's at. 52 charge bonus, 130 weapon strength with a bonus versus infantry, 44 melee attack, and frenzy and vanguard and fear. These guys are insane as far as offense stats go. They're like Bretonnian hippogriffs roided up to the max. And so in that sense, I could see this unit being huge. In situations where you need to get into an armored backline, like especially dwarves being a prime example of this, but also if you need to deal with cheap, trashy flyers. Like, for example, if you need to deal with something like harpies or bats, these guys are a hard counter to that because they've got 44 melee attack and a bonus for infantry. Those units are infantry sized. They will be able to dumpster them. It actually means the Lizardmen Air Force is going to be a force to be reckoned with. That said, obviously, it's going to be very squishy, so I think it's going to be a very risk-reward thing. If you micro these guys well, if you use them correctly, if you're able to support them with perhaps an Apotheosis or a Tempest or abilities like that, depending on what fight you're taking, they can be great. If you use them incorrectly, if you get greedy, I can see them being incredibly flimsy and failing you hard. And so that's kind of going to be a cool unit. Definitely interesting for the Lizards, who generally have forgiving playstyle, but definitely very exciting. And this is honestly the unit that I'm most excited for the Lizardmen. Not necessarily as a whole, because I'm more excited for the Skaven, but definitely as far as Lizardmen are concerned, Ripperdactyls I'm very hyped for. Next up, we do have the Bastiladon with the Ark of Sotek. This is basically just the Bastiladon. There's not much to be said for it. It's and do keep in mind some of these abilities, some of these shots are from in-game, so and this was from an ultra-sized game, so it's not going to have this much HP. It's not going to have the ward saves or anything like that. But it's basically a Bastiladon with an ability that casts a vortex that applies poison and doesn't harm allies around near it. It's basically summoning jungle swarms, so nasty snakes and bugs and crap like that. But it applies poison, it does some damage, it doesn't harm friendlies apparently. So definitely I think this unit, if it's cheap, on the cheaper end of the spectrum, if it's closer to like a normal Bastiladon, or not a normal Bastiladon, but like a Bastiladon with a Vacation Crystal or with Solar Engine, I could see this unit being a pretty potent choice. At least if the ability is decent. That said, if it's pricey, if it's a very expensive unit, I could see this being very weak. I could see it being very useless. That said, being able to poison your opponent, make them much more vulnerable to your Temple Guard or your Saurus or your big monsters is going to be huge in my opinion. And I think that could definitely see this unit being a very, very powerful support tool. Then we do have the Ancient Stegodon with an Engine of the Gods. This guy, well, he's an Ancient Stegodon who doesn't have the Ballista or the Blow Dart battery, and instead you get a whole plethora of special abilities, support powers. One is the Death Laser. This is what everyone was talking about. Everyone was pretty excited about. It fires down Death Laser from the sky. It's a wind attack. Does a lot of damage. I do believe it's only got 2 charges of it, so it's definitely not going to be able to spam that spell, but it could be a great line breaking ability. It also improves your Winds of Magic recharge, as well as guaranteeing an AoE ward save of, I do believe, 5% in an area around itself. So it's a very powerful support tool. And if this unit is cheap-ish, and when I say cheap-ish, I mean like costs within the lower 2000s, like 2,100, 2,200, something like that. A little bit more than an Ancient Stegodon. I can see this unit being very powerful. It's going to be able to give you all the support you need. It's going to be able to provide great utility, some good stopping power, and it's in melee because it's, of course, still Stegodon. So that would be awesome. If it's expensive, if it is bonkers expensive, then this unit is probably not going to be good because you don't want overpriced units. You can't really afford to waste like a quarter of your army. You can't spend like 3,000 gold or something on a single Stegodon. So depending on the situation, I can see this unit being very powerful or very garbage. But it definitely looks very cool and could be interesting. Finally, before I do move on to the Skaven, I did actually want to mention Lord Croak. He's a hero. He's got 2 abilities. One is a protective ability where he casts a sort of shield, bubble shield, which apparently I do believe is like a 44% ward save is what they said. So pretty crazy buff. His other ability is a damaging spell that I do believe it's like the Salvation of Itza or something. And that one doesn't harm allies. It does boatloads of damage. I do believe it basically annihilated a unit of clan rats in one of the games I was watching. And I do believe it's got multiple stages of that spell, but he's basically just an ability spammer. That's really Croak's big deal. Otherwise, he's obviously not great in a sustained combat. He's not a combat lord. He's literally a corpse on a floating pelican. So there's not much to be said for him in that sense. But depending on how expensive he is, I can see him being very useful. The problem is that he does take up a hero slot, and oftentimes with Lizardmen, you want like 2 Skink Chiefs, or maybe 2 Sarge Scarvets, especially if they get buffed a little bit with the Carnosaurs. Or you might want a Skink Chief and a Skink Caster, whatever. There's a bunch of different ways you can take this, but Croak taking up that slot, depending on his cost, might be just too inefficient. Next up, we do have the Skaven, and the Skaven have some cool stuff going for them as well. Now, Ikit Claw, obviously, first and foremost, he's got a mount version as well as a foot version. We've got both represented here. He does have a Doomflare or a Doomflare mount as well, which isn't listed here. But we can see his Doomwheel mount as well as his basic foot mount or foot version, as well as some abilities. So The cool thing about Ikit, well, he's got good armor for Skaven. He's very tanky by Caster Lord standards. Not quite Noctilus standard, for example, but he does have 56 melee defense. He's got AP, he's got fire and magic damage. So probably don't bring him against like high elves, but against everybody else, it's good. A bonus versus large. Solid melee attack, good melee defense of 56, just nuts. 110 armor, which is crazy for a Caster Lord. It makes him really, really tanky. Obviously, that power armor coming in handy. And then he does have a flamethrower with, I do believe, the burnt effect built into his hand, which is boatloads of damage, but obviously only has 5 shots. But that's definitely very cool. Ikit, that said, he's very expensive. We actually got to see his price. I do believe he's 2,300 gold baseline. That's obviously with all of his spells and all of his abilities, but not with his items and not with amount. So he's not a cheap lord. He's like Wartsack price baseline. Not cheap. So depending on how exactly you can finagle with his cost and his items and his abilities, he might be very good. He might also be very tough to just cram into Skaven army if he's expensive. On him mount, obviously he's just a roided up Doom Wheel with boatloads of range damage. Fear, terror like a normal Doom Wheel. Otherwise, just a little bit beefier. I do believe he's got a little more HP there. There's actually a normal Doom Wheel here that we can compare. So he's got a couple hundred more HP than a normal Doom Wheel. But besides that, he's basically a Doom Wheel. There's not much to be said there. He also does have 2 abilities that are worth mentioning. He's a Lore of Ruin caster, but he's got the Brass Orbs, which are a vortex that casts instantly and does quite a bit of damage, I do believe. And then Unlimited Power, which is a more powerful Arcane Conduit that also causes self-harm. So, bit of a risk-reward thing stacked on his high cost. This could be something you actually might not want in certain situations. That said, he definitely looks pretty cool. Definitely one of the characters I'm very hyped for. Definitely one of the things I'm really excited about. And I think Ikit's going to be quite strong for the Skaven. Having a tanky caster lord option could be huge. Especially a tanky caster that's fast on a Doom Wheel. It'd be really, really good. Then we do have the weapons team. So Warlock Jezzails, 70 armor, which is actually respectable. They're fairly tanky. They've got 300 range. Their projectiles are a little slow. Fortunately, despite my fears, they are not... they do not do magic damage. You might be wondering why I feared magic damage. Well, I was worried that these guys would suck against dwarves. Both them and the Rattling Guns. And both units actually have normal damage, so that's definitely kind of cool in my opinion. But they do also have Shield Breaker, which is really cool. So Warlock Jezzail synergize really nicely with all the other normal Skaven shooting. So whether those are Skaven Slave Slingers or Rattling Guns, all those units will do much more damage against shielded targets when they've got Warlock Jezzails breaking their shields. These guys also just have crazy range. They do a good bit of damage per shot, 22 ammo, silver shields. They can really just sit tight and trade shots blow for blow with enemy shooting. And I think that actually with the shields, if your opponent tries to outshoot you, especially if you bring a Warlock Engineer with his item that gives another 12% shield save, these guys are going to be like impossible to uproot with shooting. They're just going to be able to sit there, take it, and slug it out with you. Then we do have Doom Flayers. These guys are, from what I've been hearing, including from people who actually did get early access, these guys are pretty nuts, and apparently a bit, excuse me, a bit OP, perhaps. I don't know if I don't know the exact cost of the unit, so I think it's a little early to judge, perhaps, because we don't have a stable meta, or it's not really available to everybody. But there's definitely the stats on these guys are nuts. Now, Doom Flayers are a chariot unit. Essentially, they're 3 motorcycles, but on a large, they've got over 5,000 HP, which is actually quite a lot. That's very tanky. They've got 100 armor, and they get more armor in melee. Their melee stats aren't very good, but they have bonus versus infantry, 95 weapon strength, which is insane. For comparison, the next best single model chariot for just, I do believe not the next best single model, the next best triple model chariot that I can think of, the Gorby's chariot, has 50 damage per hit, which is basically like a little over half of what these guys do, which is just crazy. That said, their charge bonus is very low. It's only 40, but these guys are going to be much more capable of grinding it out in a sustained fight between their armor buff and their solid weapon strength. They're also going to be pretty damn mobile. They've got 72 speed, so that's definitely going to be pretty terrifying to deal with. And I can definitely see these units, as well as their Regiment of Renown variant, which is pretty insane, being a very, very powerful force on the battlefield. That said, obviously against cavalry, against guns, they're probably not going to hold up that well, so we'll definitely see where exactly these guys stand after release. And who knows, maybe they'll be nerfed before release. We'll definitely see. Finally, we do have Rattling Guns. These guys have some nutty stuff. Now, their shooting animations for both them and Warlock Jezzails are absolutely gorgeous, by the way. But Rattling guns, they just spew their green fire all over or green firepower all over the enemy. But very low ammo, normal gun range, 70 armor, so they're actually solidly protected. And here's the nice thing: 339 damage over 10 seconds. Now, you guys might be wondering how the hell this works with 24 models. Well, their accuracy probably isn't the best, that's for sure. But nonetheless, the damage is insane. If you do the math, it's over 8,000 damage, I do believe, for the whole unit if they're firing in sync and every shot connects. Now, obviously, every shot's probably not going to connect, but over 8,000 damage means that they can technically turn someone like Kolek to mulch in 10 seconds. That is insane. Stack that on top of the fact these guys are 36% slow. In one of the games today, now it was a loss for the Skaven, but in one of the games in the Ever-Chosen tourney, I guess not today now for posting this, but in one of the games in the Ever-Chosen tourney, combined with the rattling gun weapon seams stacked on top of poisoned gutter runners, actually dropped Wild Riders to 35 speed because this suppression effect has 36% slow. So these guys are absolutely nuts. They can do stupid amounts of work. And while they're certainly going to be unforgiving with their short range, relative squishiness, bad leadership, all that, I could see them being absolutely monsters. So it's also worth noting they're actually pretty slow. By Skaven standards, only 38 speed, as opposed to the Warlock is 42, and most Skaven infantry is 42. So these guys are in the same ballpark as Stormvermin and units like that. And that's it for the units. Now let's touch on the Regiments of Renown real quick and wrap things up, I suppose. Now, Regiments of Renown, there's obviously a lot of them. Now, these Regiments around here are not necessarily the campaign ones, so in campaign, well, we'll see how much of an impact these guys have. And actually, from a campaign perspective, I actually did want to mention, as far as these units go, some I don't see being too useful. For example, Crested Skanks, besides Tahanowing, who's really limited early on, I just don't see them being too useful over Saurus, who are just stupid OP. But I could definitely see units like Ancient Salamanders and Ark of Sotek and Stegodons and Hunting Packs, and especially Ripperdactyls in siege battles, being incredibly useful. For the Skaven, I actually unfortunately feel like the weapons teams will be heavily overshadowed by artillery, because Skaven artillery, it's so easy to protect it in campaign. Doom Flares, once again, they're a very powerful unit, supposedly and by appearances. But in campaign, because of how powerful Skaven artillery is and how unthreatened it is, because how bad AI is against artillery, I do feel like Warlock Jezzails and Doom Flares and Rattling Guns will just not have as much of a home. I think they'll be strong in the early, or if they're available relatively early, for sure. But I definitely do think that's actually going to be a bit of a disadvantage there. That said, going into the Regiments of Renown. First and foremost, a Ripperdactyl Regiment of Renown, Colossodon Hunters. In case you were worried that your mass air spam with Ripperdactyls and Pterodons is going to struggle against large, these guys are your solution to that. Same monster stats of normal Ripperdactyls, roided up to rank 9, but instead of bonus rush infantry, they've got a bonus rush large, and they've got an ability called the Bloat Toad, which I do believe boosts their melee stats for a period of time. So these guys are pure insanity. I'm not entirely sure how they hold up to other big flyers, but with their bonus rush large and their raw stats, I could see these guys tearing a new one to most big targets. And I could actually see them being decent against ground large targets as well. Now in the Ever-Chosen, they were kind of misused in the one match I saw them being used. They got kind of YOLO'd in. Apparently they cost 1,500 gold a pop, or for the unit. So it's definitely very expensive. But for the price, I definitely could see these stats. If you use them cautiously, if you use them effectively, I could see these guys being absolutely insane. Next up, the Pop Hoppack, or Pop Hoppack cohort, Cold and Spear Rider Regiment of Renown. These guys do not rampage, they don't have primal instincts, and they've got immunity to psychology, which is really nice. Otherwise, they Vanguard. So they're basically just the Zintler's Reichsguard of Cold and Spear Riders. Is actually a very accurate way of describing them, I think. Excuse me, got a little bit stuck in my throat there, but very stable unit that can really help in a tight situation. You can also Vanguard them up with your Skanks, or do mass Vanguard force with the Ripperdactyls and Cold and Spear Riders and Skanks, and they can really just be a nasty force there with their high melee stats and good sustained power, sort of combat power with high leadership, immunity, psychology, and Vanguard. Then we do the Thunderous one, Regiment of Renown, Ancient Stegodon. All the perks of an Ancient Stegodon with the added power of lightning that shoots from the skies. Apparently it's randomly around him. It's like a thunderbolt that just smacks the ground all around him. But this guy is absolutely insane. Looks really cool. He's got like a lightning arcing through the howdah on his back, and it's a really awesome looking unit. And obviously, the price could shake things up about how exactly useful he is. But definitely I could see in some matchups, especially against blobbed up enemies, that Ancient Stegodon could be so powerful here with the nukes dropping from the skies with lightning. Legion and a lot of these regiments around, it just boils down to cost, I think, in some cases. The Legion of Chaka here, the regiment around Star Spears, there's not much to be said for them. They're actually pretty mediocre in most respects. They're just a rank 9 unit. But they do get 15 more armor than normal Star Spears, who only have 60. And they've got this cool ability that gives plus 44% missile resist to nearby units that they can activate. And that's pretty crazy. That makes these guys incredibly powerful for supporting big monsters. And I can actually see them even used in certain off-meta matchups, like dwarves, to make sure that your large units can get value. Against a faction like Empire, which tends to have lots of heavy cav and shoot and black powder weapons, I could see these guys being an insanely good pick. Because they basically counter the 2 big tricks Empire has against you. In some way, or at least mitigate them. Then we do have the Star Chamber Guardians, Temple Guard, Regiment of Renown. These guys have Guardian. Makes sense. Regiment of Renown with Guardian. They've got perfect charge defense, or expert charge defense, so that's going to be really good, just to keep them in the fight. Crazy leadership, that's not surprising. They're Temple Guard. They've got really good stats, obviously, because they're rank 9. But they also get poison as well as melee, as well as magic damage. So they are going to be the kings of sustain, in my opinion. Definitely a bit on the expensive side, most likely. Definitely on the, I would say somewhat situational, because they are most likely going to be very expensive. And you don't always really care about magic or poison damage with Temple Guard. You might just want them to hold. But at the same time, it does give you some elite options for the Lizards, which is really, really cool. And it's going to be a good counter, in my opinion, to Ethereal units, because Lizards right now have a really bad time with magic, or getting magic damage on the field. So just being able to get that from the Temple Guard here will be really good. Then we have the Regiment of Renown, Croak of Sotek. Croak, I can't even talk. Cohort of Sotek. These are Red Crested Skink Regiment of Renown. They're basically roided up Red Crested Skanks. There's not much to be said for them, but they are unbreakable. And more importantly, they've got this ability which makes them unkillable for a period of time. They can't lose models as long as the ability is active. And you believe the ability only lasts like 15 seconds or something. But in those 15 seconds, you can get huge value out of these boys. Imagine, for example, wad up Black Orcs or something piling into you. Now, they can chop you down to size HP-wise, but you are going to be hitting back incredibly hard. These guys obviously don't have terrible melee stats necessarily, especially because they're probably, I would assume, a little bit cheaper, on the cheaper end of things, because they're only Red Crested Skanks. They'll be unbreakable. They'll literally fight to the last skink, and they will just be not dying, so they're going to be able to get their full DPS out for at least a period of time, which is really, really nice. And it could make this unit a very powerful choice. Then we do the Umbral Tide Salamander Hunting Pack. Now, these guys, I think, actually are going to be, in my opinion, better than the Salamanders, at least in certain off matchups. Now, for matchups against something like Chaos, for example, the Salamanders are probably good enough. But if you're worried about your opponent having lots of shooting against factions that have good DACA, so Empire, Dark Elves, so factions like that, these guys, I think, are going to be much better. Because they've got Stalk, they've got Perfect Vigor, so they're going to be much more capable of positioning into a good spot before they fire off their Fire Breath, or with their more respectable melee stats. They might even be able to close for melee, defend themselves well against light cav harass, and I could really see these guys being a much more decent pick in those matchups. It's against something like Dwarves, maybe they'd also be decent, because you can just keep them protected. They can kind of run in, flank and spank, unload fireballs on their opponent, and do some work. Finally, the POW Sentinels. These are Teardown Rider Regiment around. That honestly is, if there's one stinker here, I think these guys are it. Hate to say it, they just don't appeal to me. I don't see what's good about them. Now, they do have physical resist. I do believe it's like 20%. Their rocks also Armor Sunder. But in my opinion, that's kind of just garbagey. Teardowns aren't a very good unit to begin with, in my opinion. I know there's people who disagree. That's fine. But I don't think they're a very good unit to begin with. And the missile resist, in my opinion, is not going to compensate enough for the fact that you've got such a flimsy unit with low armor, low HP, terrible melee stats. Your physical resistance isn't going to compensate for that, and unless it's crazy physical resist. And the armor sundering rocks, because they're one use, I just don't see them as being that valuable. If it was armor sundering on their normal auto attacks, I could actually see it being a good support tool for your SARs. But as a one-time, one-trick ability, I just don't see it that useful. Unfortunately, I just don't know if there's really much point in these guys. So as far as Lizardmen are concerned, I think this is definitely the stinker here. But otherwise, I definitely like the look of most of these Regiments of Renown. I think they're going to be really useful. Next up, the Skaven Regiments of Renown. First and foremost, Clan Vulcan Tail Slashers. Now, we actually got to see these guys' price. 525 gold. I should actually mention the cost for the normal Warlock Engineer boy, the guy who's basically a cheap Ikit Claw, is apparently about 2,000 gold. So they're a bit cheaper than Ikit. I'm not sure what their exact stats or abilities are. But the Clan Vulcan Tail Slashers, they're basically just roid up clan knights. They got fire damage. They got better weapon strength at 34. And that's basically it. They got fire resistance, which doesn't really matter too much in my opinion. Makes you good at tanking Fireborn or something, I guess. But they just don't seem that powerful. But they only cost 525 gold, so you get some good stats. Keep in mind this melee defense will be buffed up by strength and numbers, so you're up to like 39, 29, 39. Those are decent stats for such a cheap unit. They'll probably be able to just dice through lower end infantry. So if you need to cut through some state troops or some men-at-arms or whatever, these guys will probably do the trick on a budget. Then we do have Natty Boobo's Sharpshooters. These are Regiment around Warlock Chazales who have Snipe and Stalk. Now, at first glance, I was actually I think that on one hand, I think this unit is a bit lackluster. There's not much you can do with the Snipe and the Stalk. The projectile trails on Warlock Chazales are stupidly visible. It's a neon green shot on normal Warlock Chazales. It's a neon pink or purple shot on the Natty Boobo's Sharpshooters. Nobody's going to miss them. So if you try sniping, everyone is going to know where you are. You're not going to be able to ambush anybody. You can't really kite with these guys. So you're basically forced to use them like a normal Warlock Chazale in the middle of your formation. That said, in certain matchups, if you need to push into an artillery battery, which Skaven suffer against right now, they can't. Warblind cannons don't trade well with other artillery. I think this unit might actually have a niche there because it can creep within range. It can probably stay at a safe distance. With the 300 meter range, it can probably stay in a position where it can still be sniping without putting itself at risk from, say, a cannon or an organ gun. And on top of that, you do have 300 range, so you're actually matching or getting close to matching a lot of enemy shooting. And with 9 chevrons, they're probably going to be precise enough to pick off the guns and cruise very effectively. Next up, the Blight Scab's Plague Pack, Plague Among Sensor Bearers. These guys, I think, are going to be a must-pick in some matchups or borderline must-pick. Now, their stats pretty mediocre. They're basically just Plague Among Sensor Bearers, and I actually think that's a trash unit in general. But they've got this one ability here that gives them unit psychology to nearby units. And that is insane. That is, in my opinion, going to be a huge game changer, especially in like the Vampire Counts matchup or in matches against undead and fear and terror causing factions. Having immunity psychology on all nearby troops is going to be huge. It's like having a good combat unit that doubles up as a Grail Relic. And keep in mind, these guys only cost 1,300 gold, so compared to normal Plague Among Sensor Bearers who cost 1,100, these guys are a dirt cheap choice, essentially. They give you 9 chevrons and immunity psychology in a way, so they're just awesome. If you're going to bring Plague Among Sensor Bearers, you're basically better off bringing these boys. Next up, we do have the Council Guard, Regiment around Stormmen, another unit that I think is going to be a huge game changer in those Fear and Terror matchups because they have Terror. They actually have respectable melee stats, a rarity for Stormmen Halberds, because Stormmen Halberds have terrible stats, in my opinion. Keep in mind, once again, that melee defense is going to be up to the 50s with strength and numbers. They get Guardian, and they're unbreakable, so they can just hold for days, and they won't break. They're not going to get routed by that annoying Vargulf who's rampaging in your backline. They're not going to get routed by a Mortis engine or get terrified off by a dragon or whatever. They're going to sit tight, fight to the bitter end, and they're going to be able to keep your troops or keep your lords in the fight better with Guardian. So they can protect, especially some of the squishier lords, they can protect a little bit better, but also some of the tankier lords, they can make them even tankier, which is really, really cool. Then we do have the Warp Lightning Cannon Regiment around Ikit Zap Sap. A unit that I think has some niche uses. Its main selling point is that it's a 9 chevron lightning cannon with... Oh, and I should mention, these guys are 1,300 as well. So these are the units we actually know the prices for. A handful of lords as well as these boys. So they're also 1,300, which once again I think makes them very cost effective. But going on to the Zap Zap cannon, its sole ability is Stun, which gives +10 ability recharge when it hits the target. Now this sounds great on paper against something like, I don't know, greenskins with WoW. In practice, though, I just don't see this being that useful. Now, sure, you get 9 chevrons, which is going to give you a really accurate artillery piece, which is great. Don't get me wrong, but 10 seconds ability recharge, I just don't see being that valuable. On most enemies, they're going to get into melee with you. They're going to come close. They're going to recharge on the fly. 10 seconds is basically the time it takes between shots anyway, so they're probably their abilities will probably cool down before you get another shot off. So even against a lord like Alariel or units like that, it's just not going to be that powerful in my opinion. Maybe if you need like a really clutch denial of healing, it could come in handy, but I just don't see the unit being that great. Maybe if the ability recharge penalty was bigger, if it was like 20 seconds, I could see it being better. But with just 10, I just don't see it being that good. Then we do the regiment around rattling guns. These guys have stealth bombs, which at first I thought would be kind of garbage. I didn't really see the point. But being able to get your rattling guns with their monstrous damage and their crazy suppression into good firing position where they can just mow an enemy down, keep them suppressed, and just waste them. Plus stack this on top of their boost to accuracy you're going to get out of high chevrons. And I could see this unit being a very, very powerful pick, in fact. And definitely having a strong niche. Then we have the Wheel of Doom Wheel, and we're definitely coming to the end here, which is basically just a Doom Wheel with high missile damage. There's not actually much to be said for it. It's got about triple the missile damage of a normal Doom Wheel. I do believe it was supposed to have Discouraged, but this effect is not visible here, so I assume it was removed. Perhaps it's going to come back. Perhaps it's been removed for balance reasons. I don't know. Either way, I don't really see this unit as being too useful. Maybe the bonus missile damage is worth it. I feel like you don't usually bring a Doom Wheel for the missile damage. I feel like you bring it to rampage around backlines and be a pain in the rear. Depending on how the cost is, this unit could be good, just because it's a slightly better Doom Wheel. But otherwise, I don't know. I guess if you need an intercept cav, it could be powerful, because you can intercept the cav unit and you'll mess it up with the lightning shots at point blank. And you've got actually pretty respectable melee stats, so you can just bog them down and really beat the snot out of them. Finally, the Dwarf Thing Menace, which, in my opinion, is going to be a menace to Dwarf Things. They've got, well, tier 9 stats, or level 9 stats, which is to be expected. They cause fear, unlike normal Doom Flares, which surprisingly don't cause fear. And they armor sunder, which is going to be huge. In my opinion, in a lot of cases, if you go against dwarves, if you're not going for like a weird artillery build, as Skaven, you're going to be going for an armor sundering build a lot of the time. You're going to run Stormmen or Plague Monks, try to break that armor with Death Runners, or and Weeping Blade, or Wither, or Queek's AoE, or abilities like that. And being able to get armor sundering on top of that is going to be huge. You'll be able to get these Doom Flares into a fight. You might be able to nuke like Ironbreakers down to 0 armor, nuke down some Longbeards to 0 armor, and suddenly they're getting mown down, chopped to bits, and you've got huge value. And obviously, I really think this could make this unit really valuable. So by and large, I think that the changes are going to be significant. I think a lot of matchups that were previously really difficult for some of these factions are suddenly going to become much better. I think some easier matchups are going to become even easier. People are claiming already that the Dwarf matchup is basically impossible against Skaven. I don't know. I think it's a little early to call, but definitely it's going to be much more difficult with all the new tools Skaven are getting. Definitely, the new units I think are going to be a big change. We're waiting to see what the new 3LC Lord is for the Legionmen, which I mistakenly thought was Croak, but I was wrong. It's actually Croak's just a hero. So we're actually going to be getting a real extra Lord. So we're still waiting to see what he's all about. But by and large, I just think these new regiments are renowned, with few exceptions, like maybe the POW Sentinels and maybe the Zap Cannon, are by and large, just everything else is just so good. I think most of these units actually have a good spot. They're actually kind of needed. It's not like the Charybdis, which filled this spot that wasn't really needed to be filled, on the Dark Elf roster, stuff like that. So I actually think we're going to see some big changes. I think we're going to see some big issues settled or solved here. Definitely excited to see how things shake up in the real game. Obviously, costs of individual units could really change my analysis here. Like if the Red Crested Skanks cost like 700 gold, then they are not going to be good. For example, I'm assuming they're going to be about 500 in this situation. But obviously, if I'm wrong about that, then they are probably going to be garbage. But if these units are reasonably priced, I could see each and every one of them, or almost every one of them, having a real spot and a real purpose and being really impactful. I could also see them being pretty useful in campaign, at least some of them, especially like the Engine of the Gods or the Ark of Sotek. which is definitely some cool stuff. So I do know this was a bit of a ranty video. I just wanted to cover these statistics that we have and drop my own speculation. I do apologize if you guys are already bored of it, but I'm pretty excited about the DLC, and I definitely want to sort of discuss this and bring it forward to you and just talk about it. If you guys have your own ideas, your own opinions, your own thoughts on the matter, be sure to share them down below. I'll do my best to respond as soon as I can. If you have any comments, critiques, questions, as usual, don't hesitate to post them, and I'll do my best to respond as well. As usual, guys, I do thank you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Wyvern out.